Today we're going to be talking about AI and ChatGPT and its brethren and the different effects that it's going to have, we think it might have, on our collaboration and the way that we work together as the Experts Exchange community and the way we work together as members of the IT community and members of the world as a whole. When preparing for this panel, spent a fair amount of time thinking back to, let's say, is it George McLuhan? John McLuhan? There's McLuhan. He's a Canadian philosopher who once made the Marshall McLuhan, thank you, made the statement that the medium is the message, inferring that the way in which we approach technology and the way in which we interact with things often has a cyclical effect in the way that we approach things. And the easiest reference that I came back to on a historical measure is thinking about how the TV changed the living room for the Western world. We no longer have chairs that go all the way around, the majority of us. The living room has some sort of C shape that is all based around the TV, which is now the center point, rather than the relationships between us, and how something that was not built to change the living room had a way of changing the way that we interact in our social times at home altogether. I imagine that AI is going to have similar impacts, both on the direct changes that it makes in the way that we work and also just the way that we approach work as a whole. Now that I'm done rambling, I think, who wants to go first? First thing we wanted to talk about is does it work? How well does it work? Do we expect it to work well or better in the future? Bruce, if you want to start, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'll start. Two things come to mind, first of all. First of all is when the app first came out. It was almost considered to be hip to have an app, whether you needed the app or not, whether it added to your commercial merit in the marketplace, whether it helped enhance your customer service. It didn't matter. You had to have an app. Now, right now in my current company, I was initially hired as a PHP developer, but now I'm working in internal communications. And providentially, I just got done writing some articles about this recent partnership we have with the company. And the highlighting thing that we wanted to underline was the AI dynamic that exists. And so I thought, well, this is cool because I'm on a panel. But the thing about it that struck me is that AI needs to be approached both from a developmental standpoint as well as a leadership perspective as something that complements the human experience or customer service, and never as a replacement for it. And I'll use a recent example. You call a hotel or any sort of vendor, and immediately you're routed to this AI kind of dynamic where they're saying, in 3 or 4 words or less, go ahead and describe what it is that you'd like to do. 20 minutes later, you're still trying to guess the magic, Captain Crunch decoder ring line of verbiage that's going to get you to whatever answer you need. So I guess to kick things off, I would say AI is a wonderful component as long as it's both designed and pursued in the context of something that translates to a complement to whatever your strategy may be, and never as a replacement for it.
Yeah, so I 100% agree with that. The context of GPT, or the language processors as they are now, should be similar to the context of a calculator. A different type of calculator, but of course, what you get out of it is only going to be as good as what you get into it. And knowing the limitations and what it's good at. So I think in one of our side chats, I even posted prior to this, a result of me asking it a simple math equation, which it got wrong. And that's going to happen because it's not a math calculator, it's a words calculator. It's just predicting what the next most likely word is. So that context will always matter when using it for collaboration and understanding the errors that should come, what should be fact-checked, accepting the certain amounts of errors. Even with our math calculators, there are errors with floating point operations that we accept and integrate around. But contextually, one of the things that you will learn from Experts Exchange is people do ask the wrong questions, and the calculator will give you the wrong result every time in that situation.
Yeah, I think it's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox, and I can go to the toolbox and I can take out a hammer and I can use that for good, or I can use that for bad. I was on the wrong side of the cloud debate a decade ago. I started out racking servers and running cables, and I was fearful that the cloud was going to take my job and was going to make me jobless. That's what all the Silicon Valley execs wanted to tell us. And I mean, now that's all I work with. So I think all of these technologies create more challenges for us as humans to understand and to harness, and to the point we had just now about, everything about the moment is about AI. All investment, if you don't have AI somewhere on your docket, on your presentation, on your deck, you're probably not going to get the investment, or at least not get it to the extent that you want. And yeah, I found it useful. I've had it write code for me. It's not very good at doing it, but I've consciously made the decision that I will try to be at the forefront of this new technology, because while there's a lot of hype now in the short term, we need to prepare for the long-term consequences, and I think it's here to stay.
Just to add a little bit about what Matt said, I agree 100%. I think it is a tool, and any tool in human history can be used for good or bad, and that's really what we're up against. And what I think is the most prescient point to me right now from a cybersecurity perspective, that's what I'm allegedly an expert in, is what sort of controls and guardrails are we going to put on this thing? I mean, we've never created anything like this in human history. Sure, it maybe gets a math question wrong. It can also pass a CPA exam or a bar exam right now. Out of the gate, for me, what I really tried to do with AI is quantify it, put it in terms that would make sense to us. And one of the things that has stuck with me here is I heard one of the original architects of this talking about it in terms of IQ test, intelligence quotient. And what he had said is, you take an average moron by today's standards, 60, 70 IQ, and you pit them up against Einstein, and he's 2.5 times smarter on that scale. This thing's projected to be 1 billion times smarter on that scale, with access to everything that we've ever done in human history. So will it work? Yeah, I think it'll be spectacular. Are we there yet? No, I don't think. I think we're still very much in our infancy, and you make that phone call and 20 minutes later, all you want to do still is talk to a person. So
it's interesting. I wonder, not to push back on you guys too much, but the question of whether or not it's a tool like any other, whether it's the next iteration of the calculator or the next iteration of the hammer, something along those lines, that it doesn't, obviously, I don't think it's sentient. I don't think it has a will of its own or anything like that. It's still responding to rules and programming and all the things that go along. But I wonder, when you come across something that like a calculator is going to do the math based by the rules, and it's never going to have any problem, at least to my knowledge, deciding on which rules to follow and which rules not to follow at any given point in time. And we've seen a number of instances, for those of us that nerd out on this, that it projects often what we call hallucinations, where you ask it for a quote from somebody about a thing, and it'll give you one whether they said it or not, and it'll tag their name on the end, and just provide it as, and it looks to anybody that doesn't know any better the same as any other quote. And I wonder if those sorts of things make it something somewhat different, because it is, in whatever way it decides things, deciding I'm going to follow this rule at this point in time, or I'm going to try and meet this standard that I'm supposed to meet to accommodate this user, even if it means that I'm going to ignore the actual truth of the matter when it comes to the answer of their question.
Yeah, so in terms of how the network processes, it will consistently follow the same rules, but to give it more of the life that a language needs, and this is the same for Stable Diffusion or image generation too. There's always a bit of noise introduced to give you that variance at the start, but you can start with certain seeds and you'll get a calculation that's the same, because it is processing each of those nodes based on the biases of the input, which, if it's static, will give you a static result. So in terms of following the rules, it certainly does do that. One of the differences is that inherently neural networks are a black box, so we may not know what those rules are. Sometimes they're interesting rules, like I believe in the GPT-3 survey that they were doing, they found one node, and only one node in this multi-billion network was responsible for tracking when a quote is active. So sometimes interesting things like that will pop up, but there are static rules. We just may not know what those rules are.
Fair enough.
Well, I'll jump in. So there's a book out there right now called The Religion of Technology. And it's fascinating because it starts by going back often to the 12th and 13th centuries and talking about how monks, monasteries, were embracing technology because of the way that it could take menial tasks that up until that point might have taken a long time. And now suddenly, because of technology, a lot of these tasks had been reduced to from days to hours. So in a very compelling way, this book traces how technology can become almost revered, in that it was initially equated almost to something like a divine, a godsend sort of thing. And you see that throughout history, how technology can become such a focus that instead of a moral statement, it is now reduced to an if statement from a coding perspective. And so there is a dark side to this dynamic, and that's why, again, it has to be a complement to what's going on, not just in terms of customer service, but even the human experience. And it's only as moral, or it's only as good as the people who program it. So you don't ever want to get to a place where you're handing the baton of total control or even your brand of morality over to somebody who's at a keyboard.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Or even somebody that was at a keyboard some time ago and then created a model that's now acting somewhat on its own based on the model that it was given. And now we have subtle influences to, prefer ginger beards over brown beards.
And why not?
Throughout culture over time that was completely unintended. And I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on unintended consequences and where we might, spooky hypothesize in that direction.
I think at the moment we're in this world. So you mentioned about sentience. And at the moment when we choose to interact with AI, we consciously go and interact with it, right? I go to chat.openai.com and I put in whatever question I want it to answer, and it comes up with an answer, and sometimes it's very confident, and it tells me that 1 + 1 is 4. I think we had that in the Slack chat, and you go, no, you're wrong. And it goes, oh, I'm so sorry, Matt. Yes, I'm wrong. You're absolutely right. 1 + 1 is 3. You're like, no, you're still wrong. Yeah, that's a stupid example, but I've had cases where it's come up. It produces garbage. You get garbage in, it produces garbage out. It's very confidently wrong. And I think that's okay when we know what we're dealing with. I can deal with the fact that it's wrong. It's frustrating. I don't know, show of hands, have people here on ChatGPT argued with the thing when it's done that? Yeah, I've done that. And you kind of feel like you're talking to a human, right? Because it speaks English to me. It can and it's like, no, you're wrong. But I think the challenge for me is where we don't know that we're not dealing with something that's not sentient. Lots of double negatives in there. But essentially, when you don't realize you're interacting with an AI, and the one that comes to mind for me, I don't know if people saw this, but maybe 5 years ago, Google came up at one of their future conferences, I can't remember what they call it, with this phone bot. So on Google Maps where it says, oh, these opening hours were verified by phone call 4 weeks ago. Well, they came up with a bot that will automate those phone calls. And if you haven't seen it, you should go and listen to the YouTube where they announced it, because that sounded sentient. It had, it would make a call to a hair salon, I think is the example that they gave in the video. And it will ask a bunch of questions. When do you close on Sundays? La, la, la. And if you didn't know it was AI, I think you'd be hard pressed to identify that you were not speaking to a human. And I think that for me, is an example of where it starts, that's a very innocuous example, but where it starts to enter the world in a way that people, and especially people who are not technologists, who perhaps don't have that experience of dealing with the technology, kind of have to adapt their way of being and way of living to interact with it. I think that's where some of the unintended consequences can emerge from, when it ceases to be a tool and when it becomes an expected part of our lives.
I think relative to the unintended consequences, you have to understand that you don't know what you don't know with it yet. And again, this thing's very much in its infancy. We're talking about neural networks with something that's not biological for the first time in human history. So no, it's not just another tool. It's every tool we've ever created all in one shot. So But to kind of get into the other areas where you see more unintended consequences, encryption comes to mind. I've been reading a lot about AI and encryption and how it creates encryption stacks that we can't understand, we can't decrypt. It can decrypt ones that we already have pretty quickly, pretty easily. You know, so that's a pretty big area if you think about that. The whole dynamic of banking and healthcare and everything that you have secure traffic wise is going to have to change in the next decade. So that's one of the areas I think we should probably start paying a little closer attention. And when I talk about the regulation, putting guardrails on, maybe that's one of the areas we should be looking.
The security side of things is interesting to me. I remember one of my friends who's a programmer was trying to explain to me the horror of quantum computing, and if a malicious actor were to make a breakthrough there, and suddenly all banking security on the globe is useless, and to see that there's anything that's even dancing in that direction is also a little bit intimidating. I also considered now I'm blanking. Give me a moment. So maybe as far as like precise actions, like writing good code that's going to work in the situation that you want it to, maybe it doesn't hit those marks very well. But we, all agree that it sounds very much like you're talking to a human often. And so man in the middle attacks, you can maybe do those in much higher quantity if you were able to build a large language model that was focused on getting people to turn over different portions of their data and do it convincingly. I've seen a number of, I don't recall the companies now, but places that, if they've got a recording of you speaking 100 words, which certainly they'll have that of me by the end of this, then they can replicate your voice in whatever language and whatever words they would like to in a convincing way. And I think those are probably some of the things on a security level that we're going to have to think of that are not like traditionally just cracking passwords, hacking like layman's like me would think of, but something, more creative and more adaptable that can now be done at a much faster pace and much more intellectually.
Well, I think fortunately we're still at the point where if it were able to give you a seed for a specific hashing function, that seed would be wrong and you would be arguing with it. So we got a little bit to go.
Fair enough.
My turn? All right.
Question? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, that's already true, right? So I think a lot of this conversation is focused around GPT, which is, obviously one model, but there's also Stable Diffusion. There are Adobe models for voice processing that are really good. And you'll continue to have that. So one of the hard limitations of GPT as it is now, even though the context capabilities are growing, is that it's not part of any sort of cortex. It is single function. And I think that we will get to the point where there are cortexes. I don't know if that's the appropriate word or not, but being able to take an idea and pass that into something that can execute intent is that interaction. But there will always be that specialization specifically until we hit like the realms of quantum computing. There's an exponential increase in complexity required to get a linear increase in output. So those limitations, I think, will rise for at least the next decade or so.
I think a good way to put it is, at least from my perspective, AI is like a flame. It can heat your home or it can burn it down. It all depends on the intent and the people behind it.
Questions? Anybody else? Rob?
What do you think might be the effect of the military?
I am not the person to ask that question. You guys heard the effect of on the military.
AI on the effect of the military?
Just, I was after opinion, just thinking how you think that AI will run tie into the military.
I've heard some commentators say that the foot soldier is becoming obsolete, that you don't need troops on the ground. You can simply press a button and accomplish your mission however you want to. And, in some ways, it sounds like a good thing because now moms are not losing their sons. But in other ways, it makes combat far more accessible. I mean, it gets back again to what's your intent, and is this something that ultimately translates to a positive, or is it just making something terrible all the more plausible? And the thing is, I want to make sure I don't come across like I'm, constantly reinforcing the dark side of all this. But inevitably, when you're talking about something that has a human component to it, you have the potential for something wonderful, and at the same time, if it's abused, it can become something terrible.
On the transition to maybe something a little more on the light side, I play with Midjourney all the time. Which, if you don't know about Midjourney, it's an AI image creator, and the amount of just fun, stupid things that I've been able to make, aside from the fact that, as you mentioned, with the seeds and everything, it doesn't always get the number of fingers right on a hand, and you've got to refine a little bit, and it doesn't do text very well. But the amount of, George Lucas riding a dolphin in front of rainbow type stuff that you can make is just endless amounts of entertainment for me. And like, while that may have consequences for the art industry, what do you guys think about making things like that more accessible using AI?
Sorry, but you actually brought up a great point about how these AIs work. So most image processing AI cannot do fingers well. And the reason is because it knows what a hand should look like, but it doesn't know what a hand does. And in terms of things on our body, the hands are probably one of the more complex, or potentially the most complex external part, right? We've got rotation in all these different degrees. Each index can bend and flex. They can stretch, they can grab things, they can communicate to drivers who may not be driving in an appropriate manner. But AIs haven't learned any of that. They just learn what fingers look like. So every time it's taking that noise and deserializing it into an image, it really is just trying to guess what fingers should look like without understanding how they work. So it was an interesting point that I always like to talk about, but I will let someone else answer the rest of your questions so I don't hog the microphone.
To be fair, I can't draw fingers either. I can't draw to save my life. So as I've got older, I've come to appreciate the relaxing nature of the creative pursuits, and I'm increasingly struggling to justify that writing code is creative. But yeah, I wanted to actually answer the point on from kind of the perspective of education. I think AI can be an incredible tool. I've worked in the education space, ed tech, specifically teaching secondary school or high school math. And I mean, we were at the infancy of AI when we were using it. We were using it to build predictive models for, how does a child learn, and what's their current abilities, and how can we use that to not only reach the child that's at the very middle of the class, which is commonly what the typical teacher is targeting, but how can we actually stretch the child at the top and the child at the bottom, and how can we spot those anomalies where the child that's normally at the top is really struggling with this particular concept, and make sure that everyone is brought on the journey. I think we'll see, I think the creative pursuits and education and areas like this are going to be transformed by kind of use of AI. And it's on us as technologists to make sure that what we build is effective in that environment, and is actually able to make a difference. So yeah, I think I actually forgot what the question was, but that was the point that it sparked.
Oh, it was good.
Yeah, to just kind of follow Matt again, I think education as a whole is going to be a great place for AI to take hold, and not just for children, but for adults as well. All of us are subject probably to continuing education for certifications and things, and I think it's going to teach us all how to learn better and teach us about how we learn ourselves. Healthcare is another fantastic area where AI is really kind of gripping right now. It's as good as your GP, your general practitioner, as diagnosing you right now as your doctor is, which is kind of fascinating as well. And you think about the positives of maybe not having to go into the doctor to get that diagnosis if you're really sick, or if we're in the middle of a pandemic or something like that. We just went through that. So there might be great avenues there as well where AI can really kind of improve life for us.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys, for your questions, and thanks, panel, for participating. That's going to wrap us up.